everyone, my name's Lauralee. I'm the interpretive intern here at Bastrop State Park as well as Bisher State Park just down the road. Right now I'm joined by Madeline.
Hey guys.
She's the interpreter here at both Bastrop and at Bisher. And today we are doing the second video in Backpacking 101 mini-series.
And today we're going to be talking about how to pick a trail. There are several things you have to keep in mind when looking through all the different trails that you can potentially go on, and we're going to be diving into some of the key factors you have to think about in just a second.
There are a number of factors that you have to keep in mind when picking a trail. Some factors are experience, fitness, weather, terrain, and time. And to dig a little bit deeper into those, you need to ask yourself, kind of like in the last video, what's your experience level? In these videos, a lot of times I'm assuming, since you're watching the basics, that y'all are just starting off and you don't have much experience. And in the fitness level as well, you know, what kind of fitness have you done? So have you done a lot of running, a lot of fast walking? Have you done exercise that generally has raised your heart rate, where you would be able to go for a longer period of time or in a more challenging trail? And moving more on to the exacts of the trail that you're looking at, weather is one of the most important things that you have to keep in mind, because it can be one of the most dangerous and the most lovely. So just for example, I'll bring up a couple of different hikes that I've been on where I had to prepare for the weather there, and in particular with how I packed and with how I prepared physically and mentally too. Starting with Big Bend, I did the Outer Mountain Loop Trail. Y'all comment below if y'all been to Big Bend, and tell me some of your favorite parts about it, and if you've been on any backpacking trails. I'd love to hear that. But yeah, I did the Outer Mountain Loop as my first backpacking trip ever. And something to keep in mind about Big Bend National Park, it's out in the Chihuahuan Desert in West Texas. So as deserts are concerned, it's very dry. There is hardly any water, much less water that you can rely on consistently. And the temperatures can get very, very hot in the summer and cold in the winter. My trip, I went in the winter time because at least I would be saving a little bit of water and exhaustion going in the cooler temperatures versus going in the summer. And during that time, we really had to think about what kind of clothing we needed to wear for those cold temperatures. Also, with it still being a desert, we don't have any water out there, so we had to make sure that we brought the right amount of water, which you'll be able to find that information usually on the National Park Service website if you're going to a national park. And I've actually prepared a couple of water measurements for state parks specifically during the summer, which I can provide in the content section of this video.
It's important to make sure you have the right amount of water when going hiking, especially during the Texas summer. The following chart shows water amounts and bottle capacities you may be familiar with. The metal cup measurer is 1 cup, with the Smart Water bottle, Nalgene bottle, and Gatorade bottle all equaling 4 cups, equivalent to 1 quart, or approximately 1 liter. The Texas Outdoor Community water rule of thumb for the summer is to have at least 1 quart of water, 4 cups, or 1 liter of water per hour of hiking. This means if you are hiking 5 hours in a day, you should have at least 5 Smart Water bottles or Nalgenes of water. The water amount can be adjusted down depending on the climate and time of year, but 1 liter per hiking hour is what is recommended for the hot summer in Texas. I recommend starting your first backpacking trip in the fall or winter, and we'll be building a few state park trip plans with water measurements suited for the cooler autumn and winter seasons. In the gear video coming out soon, I will show a few pieces of gear you can use to carry your water as well.
But that's a huge thing in deserts you have to think about, just in that climate, having to work with the water circumstances. And now going to the Grand Canyon, It was a very different experience. The same in that it was a very dry desert area, but different in that I went in March when it was supposed to be very cold, and so we prepared with all of the winter gear, but we also had done some research that it could get very warm, and matter in fact it did. Our first night we stayed on the rim and it was 19 degrees, very cold. We woke up and we were putting up the tent poles, and there was frost and ice on the tent poles. And then we went down and we reached the very bottom of the canyon to the Colorado River, and it was 95 degrees. And fortunately, we had prepared and we had plenty of water. But that was something that we had done research on, looking at a number of blogs based on people in my group's past experience and the National Park Service, what they had talked about pertaining to the weather in that climate at that time. So those are all things you want to make sure that you prepare for when picking your trail. Is, you know, a lot of times in these desert areas, for example, Big Bend and Grand Canyon, not only do you have to have the space to be able to carry that kind of water, but you have to be able to have the strength to be able to carry that. A gallon of water can weigh 8 pounds, or does weigh 8 pounds, and a liter, which I can show you right here, this is the common measurement used in backpacking lingo. A liter is equal to 4 cups, which is about 1 quart, and this can weigh 2.2 pounds. So in the past, in these desert areas, I would carry about 10 liters of water for a 4 to 5 day trek, which meant that it was at least 22 pounds of water starting off, which is a lot of weight to consider. So another place that weather, in my experience, was very important to know about and to research beforehand was at the Four Pass Loop in Colorado. That's in the northwestern section of Colorado in the Aspen Wilderness. And there, it's beautiful, gorgeous during the summer. Temperatures are usually in the 50s and 60s. It can get colder, and so we had clothes prepared for that. But the largest thing I would say that I had to prepare for and think about in planning my trek and picking that one in particular was that it, just like clockwork, because we were so high up in elevation, Four Pass Loop has 4 12,500 foot passes. So we were a lot of times above tree line on these passes. When we get up that high, we were above anything else. So these thunderstorms, because of this high elevation, would come in like clockwork right at noon and create lightning, rain, hail, you name it. And it's a beautiful place to be up on top of these passes, but you don't want to be the tallest thing around when these storms come in. So knowing that we had to plan the trail, we had to plan the trip around those thunderstorms at noon was really important so that we wouldn't be up there at that time.
Another thing that is important to keep in mind when picking a trail that is high in elevation is, unless you live in an area like this, which Texans don't, for example in Bastrop, we're at a little above 300 feet in elevation, your body will not be acclimated to the pressure difference in higher altitudes. Make sure you are adequately training fitness and logistics-wise for a trip like this, with proper exercise, elevation sickness knowledge, contingency plans, and days at the altitude to acclimate before your backpacking trip. I will go into further detail on how to prepare for different terrain such as this in the How to Train for Your Trail video.
Just in general, whether knowing what you're comfortable with, what you've been around a lot. For Texans, which I would imagine the majority of those watching are Texans or live in Texas, you know, you're most familiar with probably dry areas, not a lot of rain. So that's a good place for you to start versus going somewhere like in Colorado during the winter or Canada during the winter, where it's a very different climate than you're used to. So that's another thing to keep in mind with weather, is make sure that you've been in it some and you're properly preparing with research and such. To move on to the next factor of terrain, it often ties into weather, because weather systems often create around what kind of terrain it is. But for example, right now we're in a nice forest, really gradual hills, not too challenging for if you're doing a backpacking trip, especially starting off. A lot of Texas is like this in that there isn't a lot of up and down, except for whenever you go out west towards Big Bend, Guadalupe Mountains, such like that. But being able to know how much elevation change you'll be experiencing is really important, especially for your fitness. If you've done a lot of cardio and you've experienced a lot of up and downs, like in Colorado or some of these areas with higher elevation, then you know what that's like. But for the beginner, knowing if you're going to be climbing 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 feet in a day, preparing that in your timeline whenever you make your trip plan, that's really important. In Big Bend, for example, starting out from the desert floor going up into the basin, that can be up to 3,000, 4,000 feet in elevation change. So you don't want to attempt that all in one day unless you're truly prepared for it. So another thing with terrain, as I was mentioning, is the importance to know how to read a topographic map. National Geographic, as well as a number of other companies, make wonderful maps that will be able to show elevation change. It will show rivers, train tracks, roads, trails, you name it. It's just a wonderful tool, and I feel like a necessary tool to have whenever you go into the backcountry. And a lot of people starting off, like myself, I didn't know how to read one in my first couple backpacking trips, but I was around people who did. So I really recommend, especially if you're going alone or with a couple other people that don't know, learning. And online there are plenty of resources for that. A couple of videos here now will be doing very basic lesson on how to read a topo map, particularly with elevation. And the last thing, last major factor in picking a trail is timing. How far out are you planning this? Are you starting a year out and you're eyeing a trail, let's say in the Olympic National Forest in Washington? It's very competitive to get backcountry permits in. Are you getting into that lottery a year in advance? Or is it more of a last minute kind of thing where you're going to a national forest or maybe a state park? These are some of the things you have to think about in preparation for being able to get out there. In addition, how much time do you have? Are you able to get off from work? How long is that? And a lot of times people will often think, oh, well, I have a weekend and I'll do 10 miles each day. And that kind of ties back into the terrain, is that having an understanding of what elevation you will be experiencing will determine how many miles and in what area you're going to be doing your trek each day. So that's another huge thing, is just elevation and timing for how many miles you're doing and at what time. And lastly, with time, sunlight is a major resource for us. Headlamps are amazing, which I'll talk about later, but I recommend for people just starting out to hike just during daylight hours, just for safety and being able to take in all that's around you as well. And depending on the season and where you are, that sunlight can change. So for example, in Texas right now, there seems to be sunlight all the time. Can't really get rid of it. I'm probably red right now from the amazing sunlight we have.
It is 100, it's supposed to be 100 degrees today, or it feels 100 right now, and then 105 is supposed to be like the high that it gets. So yeah. It's hot in Texas.
As I'm sure most of y'all know. Y'all should comment right now somewhere where y'all are at and how hot it is.
Or where you wish to be, where it might be cooler.
Yes, that's more positive thinking. I like that. Hopefully we'll be able to prepare you to get to that place.
Yes.
But yeah, so sunlight is of abundance during summer in most places. So you can get up early. It's 6:30 and the sun's up, and then the sun will still be up around 8:30. So that's a lot of time you'll be able to hike. But during the winter months, especially if you're up in higher latitudes, like let's say like the northern part of the United States, up in Washington or up in Alaska, you have a very limited window of sunlight. And even down in Texas, a lot of times the sun in the winter won't come up until 7:30 or 8, and then the sun will be going down around 5:30 or 6. So just being aware of how much sunlight you'll have and plan your trip around that is another big factor in having a successful trip.
As a recap, today we talked about how you pick a trail. That depending on a number of factors, being experience, fitness, weather, terrain, and time. This document that I have right here, I'll be attaching with the post, so feel free to take a look at it and look over what we talked about. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next video where we talk about what gear you need for your trip.